What's up guys, Xbox Tech Junkie back today with another video. Today we are finally talking about Halo Oblivion, so let's just jump right into it. Okay, so Halo Oblivion is the second book in what is known as a Master Chief story. Now, technically you could argue it's the third one because the Fall of Reach is essentially the origin story and is a full-on story about the Master Chief. But in the realm of a Master Chief story, basically by the subtext on the book, this is the second book, and it is officially written by Troy Denning, who did Halo Silent Storm. These books actually are just within 1 year of each other, Silent Storm in 2018 and Oblivion in 2019. Now, for those who don't know, during 2019 is when we finally got the Halo Infinite Discover Hope trailer, giving us our first look at Halo Infinite, getting a vague release date of 2020, back when things were somewhat normal. By the way, yes, this book was written by Troy Denning, who did Silent Storm, so a lot of the feel and the theme of Silent Storm is in this book, as well as along with many of the characters who were in Silent Storm. However, an interesting fact is, while I was doing some research for this book, I found some old tweets by Troy Denning, pretty much talking about Silent Storm, Oblivion, and even Shadows of Reach, which is the third book in the Master Chief story that we'll get to later on. He essentially said that, at least with both of these books, and as well as Shadows of Reach, they're not really a series technically, meaning you can technically read them in either way. You don't need to read Silent Storm to understand Oblivion. You don't need to read Oblivion to understand Shadows of Reach. To a degree, I kind of disagree with him, and I'll get more into why throughout the video, pretty much at the end. I do agree that you don't need to read Silent Storm and Oblivion to understand Shadows of Reach. There will probably be some major, not really major, but some minor themes and characters that are mentioned, but I don't think you have to read either one of these books to understand Shadows of Reach. But again, we're talking about a completely different book. But I will talk about why I think Troy's a bit wrong on that aspect. I do agree to a point, and once we get to the video, I'll explain. Now, before we jump into the actual book, let's talk about this cover. This cover is very reminiscent to that of Silent Storm, where it's an up-close shot of the Master Chief wearing his Cobalt Mark IV armor. The art style is done by Chris McGrath, who obviously did Silent Storm, Oblivion, and also Epitaph, and I believe Shadows of Reach as well. So he's done a lot of really great covers, specifically Epitaph I really enjoyed. Now, when it comes to this cover itself, it's cool because, it's a side profile of Master Chief in that Cobalt armor, like I said. He's holding what appears to be a Halo 5 Magnum on the surface of Netherop, which is where this book takes, majority of the time. Overall, I think it's a great cover, but if I had to choose between this one or Silent Storm, me personally, I'm going with Silent Storm. I don't know what it is about that cover, but it's so peaked to me, and I remember the first time they got revealed, I was just so in love with it, and that still remains the same to this day. Alright, so let's talk about the book. So the book opens on the planet of Mesra. Now, the planet of Mesra is pretty big because it contains these things known as xenotime mines. Mines that hold valuable elements and resources that are used for things like fusion reactors, lasers, all that kind of stuff. And there's a belief amongst the UNSC that the reason the Covenant is here is because they want these mines, for themselves. We don't actually ever get the Covenant's perspective of why they're here, if they are here for the mines. Part of me doesn't believe it's the mines because the Covenant has such a, larger grasp on things like technology-wise that I don't see these mines being as integral to them. In fact, I think there's probably something Forerunner on this planet, though it's never clearly mentioned by the end of this introduction. Similar to Silent Storm, this first mission is just kind of a, get the ball rolling. Let's just talk about something that the Spartans are doing. And while that's happening, we get to see Chief's perspective. This only takes place a few weeks after the end of Silent Storm. It's in June of 25-26. I'll get the actual date of when, Silent Storm ended, but like I said, it's within at least 6 weeks. And we kind of get some filler of what has been happening in those 6 weeks since the end of Silent Storm. So on one aspect, we get John talking about the events of Silent Storm, talking about how they went on missions, they boarded ships, they destroyed a giant, supply chain that the Covenant has been using within this system. Then we also get a very quick and brief mention of John and the rest of the blue team going down to Corbulo Academy and saving 3 cadets. If you don't know, those 3 cadets, at least amongst them was Thomas Lasky. He is discussing the events of Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn, which I found to be just so cool that we kind of get like a more, concrete of when this happens, and the fact that it builds the story of the Halo universe. Now, on this mission, John isn't technically in charge. He's in charge of Blue Team, but he's technically working with 2 different groups. On one end, you have the UNSC, who is planting, bombs in these mines to prevent the Covenant from capturing them. And then on the other end, he's helping the Mezarani militia. These people who have, grown up on this planet are fighting to protect it from the Covenant. And so when the time comes that, the Covenant's coming, John has to work with them in order to save their planet, or at the very least save them and, cut their losses and get off the planet. However, for the Mezranis, they're not here to live to fight another day. They want vengeance. They've been fighting for days, weeks, months, to the point where they're just tired and exhausted. And John can see this. He can tell that many of them are sleep deprived. And instead of creating a plan where they can find a way to rout the Covenant and take them out by ambushing them and preventing any further losses, they want to ambush the Covenant and just rain hell upon them. And John disagrees with this tactic because he believes all it will do is lead to more death, especially those of the Mezranis. Mezranis don't care. They're here to get vengeance. Whether they live or die, they don't care. So what John and the rest of Blue Team do is they go and take tactical sniper positions around this gorge so that they can see the convoy of Covenant wraiths coming. Now these wraiths are essentially going towards the direction of these Xenotime mines, and the general in charge of the UNSC side of the forces is telling John, you need to prevent those wraiths from getting here, take them out. And John's like, we can do that. However, the plan was originally to get them to come across a bridge, blow the bridge, and then trap them, but the Covenant was smart. They stopped before, and instead of just falling into this trap, they begin bombarding the area in which that the Mezranis are hiding in, their bunkers, and they also release 1,000 buggers, aka drones, on them. And so immediately this mission goes from, asset denial to trying to survive this many drones. Now, unfortunately for the Mezranis, they were very easily outnumbered by 1,000 drones, and pretty much all of them die. John, of course, blames himself, thinking he should have been more upfront with the Mezrani militia, saying no, this is a bad plan, here's what we're gonna do. But there was nothing he could do in that situation, but he still does not take this loss easy. And in fact, it gets much worse. Commander Emilia Petrov of Night Watch, one of the many prowlers that we get to see in these Troy Denning books, calls out John as she is orbiting the planet and tells him that he needs to evacuate or be extracted immediately. Apparently something's been going on outside the planet and it's a very big deal, and so immediately Blue Team needs to be pulled out. Now realizing that he's very much on a time crunch, John only has minutes to try and, keep these tanks from coming. But obviously, trying to destroy that many tanks in such a little amount of time is impossible, to the point that John fails. And the general's, pissed off at him because he fails to protect them. He fails to prevent the race from coming. And the Covenant does, in fact, take the mines from the UNSC. Making their way to the ship, John is immediately berated by Commander Petrov because he took extra time trying to complete the mission. John, of course, is used to being scolded for taking actions into his own hands, but for him, he believes that when him and his team are on the ground, they are in full control of their actions. And to the degree he is right, but apparently this mission or this event that's happening outside of the planet is so big that Commander Petrov doesn't care. She is just railing into him. Either way, they extract the Spartans and get off the planet. So this big development that's happening comes from Admiral Preston Cole. He is giving a full-on order to redirect Blue Team's efforts to the planet of Netherop. Now, if you don't remember from Silent Storm, Netherop was the planet in the very first introduction of Silent Storm when they're first boarding that ship to try and take it. It's the planet that they're hovering over. And when I first read Silent Storm, I was like, wait, this planet's a big deal in this book, right? Not in that book, but it's definitely this book to where it is. Evidently, Covenant forces were fighting a task force of, UNSC ships in the area, and one of those ships was taken down. Not destroyed, but disabled to the point where it had to go to the planet's surface and is still intact. Seeing this as a major opportunity for the UNSC to finally capture a Covenant ship, because remember, that's what they were trying to do in Silent Storm, was capture a Covenant ship. The admirals decide that the best way to do this is to get Blue Team onto that planet, secure the ship, and either A, scavenge it if it gets destroyed, or B, take the ship altogether. John doesn't like it. He thinks it sounds too good to be true. He believes that this is certainly bait. He's realizing that his team of Spartans, not just Blue Team, all of Spartans, are going to become a priority target for the Covenant, specifically because of the Silent Shadows. They've been seeing more and more of the Silent Shadows wherever the Spartans are at. So John sees this opportunity as more of a bait and trap for him and his Spartans. Pretty much everyone agrees with him. Petrov, Cole, Halsey, even Blue Team are like, yeah, this is clearly a trap, but it's also our biggest opportunity, so you're going anyways, bud. Now, before we can switch over to, what's going on Netherop, we actually get back into Nezat Kavorsy. If you don't remember who that is, he is the fleet master of the fleet of Unsung Piety. I really, really enjoyed this character in Silent Storm, and I really enjoy him in this book. We get a big development from what happened to him at the end of Silent Storm. Remember, he was charged with taking out the Spartans and defending the Ring of Mighty Abundance. All things he failed to do by the end of Silent Storm, resulting into the death of both the Silent Shadow and as well as one of the major ministers that was housed on his ship, though that minister was beheaded by his own steward, Tam Lakosi. Now, this is kind of where I disagree with Troy on you don't have to read Silent Storm in order to prepare for Oblivion, because even though the story does a good job right here of summarizing the events of Silent Storm, it doesn't give it the full weight that you would get from reading that book and like the appreciation for these characters and this development. We learn that right now Nezat is hovering over the planet of Netherop. But then we get a quick little flashback of what's been going on since then. What happened directly after the events of Silent Storm when the Ring of Mighty Abundance was destroyed. And this is a very cool scene to me. Nezat and his fleet were called back to High Charity to basically give witness to the prophets, tell them what happened, why did things go wrong. And for Nezat, he sees this as his possible end. He is no longer on the path of transcendence, to walk with the foreigners, aka the gods. He sees that he's now on the path of oblivion, being strayed from the gods, being forsaken from them. But for Nezat, this isn't just the end. He has a possible plan that he thinks might convince the prophets to give him another shot and look favorably upon the gods. So when he gets to High Charity, he obviously first meets with the High Charity's honor guards, the people who protect the prophets. He then enters their own sanctum and, gives his testimony about the things that happen. Right now, we're seeing a very cool little shift in how the prophets work. Typically, we always see Truth as like the leader, and then we see Regret as more of like the annoyed and like just, let's hurry up and get this over with. And then Mercy is just chilling, But in this instant, Mercy's kind of the one leading the charge. Truth is the one being quiet, and Regret's actually still just being Regret. He's actually kind of an annoyance in this. The entire time, he just wants, Nezat done with. He wants him killed. He doesn't say that outright, but it's clearly obvious he wants to order the Silent Shadow to take out Nezat for his failures. Mercy, on the other hand, wants to hear Nezat out, especially when he says he doesn't believe that the way in which the Covenant is fighting is the right way. He thinks that they think that just by bombarding the humans with overwhelming strength is going to win them this war. He doesn't see that as being the way. In fact, he sees the biggest way of destroying the humans is by going for the source, the Office of Naval Intelligence, aka ONI. And that's actually the smartest thing I've ever heard from anyone in the Covenant. Once he describes what ONI is to the prophets, he describes a plan that he thinks would help them find them and wipe them out. But this plan is very risky. Nezat wants to use luminal beacons, these forerunner artifacts that can essentially tell like their navigators where they are. Think of them almost like a tracker, you put an air tag on your dog and you let your dog go frolic and play, and you can just check your phone and it'll tell you where the dog's at, right? It's similar to that, but what the way they were originally supposed to be used is they only had 4. One of them went missing in the center of the galaxy. I think one of them went missing. Two of them were with Nizat, and then one of them was in High Charity. The two that were with Nizat were with him because the duty of his flotilla or his fleet was to explore, foreign space, non-covenant controlled space. And if they happen to find a Halo ring, they activate the luminal beacon, basically telling High Charity, hey, this is where the ring is, get here right now. And that would allow them to instantly, find the coordinates and transport the fleet to that space so they can get to the Halo ring. During, the destruction of the Ring of Mighty Abundance, one of the ships is destroyed that is housing the luminal beacons. At first, Nizat doesn't tell them this. He tells them that the plan is, let's take two of our luminal beacons, hide them in objects that the humans would want, such as a shield harness, because that's stuff that they wouldn't have been wanting, or anti-gravity devices, because that's, things that humans would want in order to study and reverse engineer. It's a very clever plan. Once the humans take those and go back to Oni, the beacons will be activated through High Charity, and they would find the location of Oni and go there and take Oni out. Mercy and Truth actually really enjoyed this plan. They pretty much give it the green light. That is until they ask him about the two beacons he already has, and he kind of tries to, pivot from that conversation, but Regret's not dumb. Regret says, so, why are you being weird? Where's the beacons? He finally tells them that one of them's been destroyed. That means now there's only two left in the Covenant. And at that point, Truth, and actually just all three prophets, are not willing to lose any more of those beacons because they are valuable and rare objects to them. So they pretty much tell Nizat, hey, it's a good plan, but unfortunately we don't have the tools and resources. You're cooked, little bud, get out. Nizat pretty much says, all right, that makes sense. Thank you, and he leaves. You would think that would be it. You would think Nizat would go back to his ship and just await being killed by the Silent Shadow, something he's been dreading this entire time. But in fact, when he gets outside and he's talking to one of the main honor guards, he realizes he only has one option and beheads the honor guard, leads his men. You remember, this is his fleet of men, to the Beacon Keeper's vault, where, this random Sanshayum who guards the beacons just chillax him, kills him, and takes the beacon. And they pretty much just commit treason right then and there. We then fast forward back to with Nizat in present day, and we learn that the ship that the humans are calling Lucky Break, the Covenant ship that's been disabled and now John and his team will go down and save, or salvage, is known as Steadfast Strike to the Covenant. From here forth, I'm going to just call it the Lucky Break, just because it's easier than trying to jump between names. But we learned that the ship was purposely disabled because it's supposed to bring humans down so that they're, enticed to go aboard, take the devices and or the ship, and get off the planet. Though getting the ship is never really in Nizat's plan. He just plans to have it to where they take the actual luminal beacons. But yes, that is the entirety of the plan. We then switch back over to the Night's Watch, where John and the Blue Team are getting ready to be deployed. Now, with a normal mission, especially aboard a Prowler, the Prowler would enter orbit and then for at least 12 to 16 hours, orbit the planet in stealth, kind of just taking in everything, do some reconnaissance, getting all the information that they need. But Commander Petrov does not care. She wants to hit the ground running. So the moment they exit slip space, they go directly to the planet, and John sees this as a huge mistake because without that information, he and his team have no way of preparing for every eventuality. Think of this almost in Halo 4 when John asks about the reconnaissance team's information before he attacks the giant particle cannons in Halo 4, and Captain Del Rio's that will slow us down, just get in there and do his job. And Cortana's I like information with my information. That's pretty much exactly what's going on right here. We see mere moments why John was so concerned with not doing more reconnaissance, because the moment that they enter the atmosphere of the planet, they are immediately bombarded by Covenant weaponry. And in fact, to the point that some of the Pelicans that were acting as little guards for the ship, taken out. And in fact, the Night Watch itself gets shot down. We do learn that another ship, more of a cargo transportation ship known as the Wheatley, earlier was able to land on the planet relatively fine, and in fact, it landed relatively close to the Lucky Break. Unfortunately for John and the rest of Blue Team, and also known as Blue Force, which is a composition of, some Marines / crewmen of the Night's Watch as well as Blue Team, their ship goes down. Now, pretty much everyone does survive, but the ship is severely damaged to the point that Amelia Petrov has to basically arm its self-destruction sequence. Now, this is where we get a brief POV of Petrov, and we learn that the reason she's being so aggressive with this mission is she's hoping that by capturing this ship, she can, propel herself onto the path of becoming a fleet admiral. That is her dream. That is her goal, to be a fleet admiral. And this mission can really help her out with that. So, right here, she arms her ship's detonation. She arms it in two ways. One, it will go off when she tells it to. Or B, in the event of her death, it will go off. So either way, it's going off, but we just don't know when yet. It's a pretty big nuke aboard that ship, so they got to get at least super far away from it as possible. Again, for some reason in these books, they really enjoy nukes, is all I'll say. About 2 hours later, Blue Force is traveling across the surface of Netherop. It's extremely hot. It's not fun at all. Fortunately, the Spartans decided to grab the water containers from the ship, so they have water, but the heat is intense for everyone. They make their way as far away as possible, but eventually they have to do something because it's been 2 hours, which means the Covenant has had 2 hours to be on Petrov's ship, collecting data and collecting all this stuff. And remember, this is before the Pearl Protocol, so I don't believe they really sat there and wiped much of anything. Maybe they did, and I'll just have to redouble check. But this predates the Cold Protocol. Eventually, the rest of the team comes across a gulch that could be used as cover from the nuke's blast. Unfortunately, within this gulch, at the rims, are these weird little, I don't know how to describe it, cornices. These basically these things that if hit hard enough or well enough, could fall down the gulch and essentially injure or kill anyone who's hiding beneath it. So what John does is he orders Fred to go to the top of this gulch, blow the cornices beforehand, so that way when the nuke goes off, there's nothing to fall down upon them. We get a quick POV of Fred basically climbing to the top of this mountain / gulch, and when he's up there, he can see everything, and he looks down to the base of the gulch where Blue Force is, and realizes it's not like a normal gulch. It looks more like a culvert, like something that's going underneath a highway. And he brings this up to John. He says, looks like you're on top of an abandoned highway. And John's like, that's real cool, bud. Could you blow those cornices? And so Fred starts, blowing them with his rocket launcher. While doing this, he gets confirmation from Petrov that she's literally 10 seconds away from arming the nuke. So he needs to wrap it up. Blowing the cornices and getting prepared to make his escape down to the gulch where he'll be safe, he noticed something in the distance. Not super close, but close enough that he can see it. And it appears to be this giant spider with children on top of it coming near him. And this stuns Fred to the point where he doesn't have time to escape the blast radius of the nuke. And this is more of the shockwave. This isn't just the actual full-on effects of the nuke. So realistically, he just gets blown away, as well as anyone on top of that gulch with him. Meaning those 2 kids on top of the weird spider thing also got blown away. After the nuke goes off, John and Kelly set out to find Fred because they lost contact with him. And then briefly are able to get in contact with him and find out that his armor locked up, he's completely fine. But he does mention to John, hey, I saw 2 kids on top of a giant spider. And right there, all Blue Team's okay, he hit his head or something. So they leave Linda with Blue Force while Kelly and John go off to find Fred. They come across Fred, who's actually fine. His armor's fine, he's fine, but he's fully convinced he saw these kids on top of the spider. John and Kelly and even Linda, who's listening over, comms, is sure, bud, that's great. And Fred's listen, let's just go look. I promise we'll find something. Unfortunately, Commander Petrov says no. And she says no because she's ordered more Pelicans to come down and extract them to get them to the Lucky Break, When their ship initially went down, they were nowhere near close to the lucky break. And so, using these pelicans, they would be able to get there faster. Unfortunately, everything just seems to be going to shit for them. As those pelicans are making their way towards the team, a group of banshees and seraphs come down and take the ships out, basically meaning they have no means of transportation to get from where they're at to the lucky break. Petrov, knowing that this environment is deadly for normal humans, orders John and the rest of the blue team to advance without them. She says your armor, your physical augmentations, and everything will allow you to better traverse the environment. You're gonna have to go on without us and just come back for us when you either complete the mission or you get other means of transportation. John, realizing that this is probably the only sound order she's been able to make all day, confirms the plan, and him and blue team make their way towards the lucky break. Traversing across the surface, John and the rest of the blue team come across pieces of coal in the ground. And this is weird to John because this planet has known to never house life. It's always been a planet that is just inhospitable. Not completely impossible, but if you lived here, you're gonna struggle. And so finding things like an abandoned highway, random pieces of coal lying around, all things that sound human at the very least, is starting to confuse John, especially after hearing from Fred that there are children on this planet that are, native to the planet. John's doubting it. He's like, there's no possible way. That is until they are ambushed by something. And it's the giant spider. Now, in fact, it's not an actual living spider. It's more of a giant robot mechanism vehicle that just resembles a spider's body structure. And in fact, it has a relatively good microwave-esque weapon that when used on Fred disables his armor once again. And John has to give fight to this little spider thing with these kids on top of it by himself until Kelly's able to come in, put a few rounds into the spider, causing the children on top of the machine to basically abandon it and run away. Getting Fred back up and helping John, who was actually crushed by the giant vehicle, the team gives chase to these three kids who didn't run really far, just ran far enough to get their little slingshots out and start pelting the Spartans with rocks. Of course, this does absolutely nothing to them, so blue team is very easily able to, apprehend the kids. Now you're probably wondering, I've been mentioning Fred, John, and Kelly a lot, but never Linda. Linda's very much present in this book, but since she is a sniper, she just acts as Overwatch. 90% of the time, she's not, physically with their group. She's somewhere in a farther radius away, providing Overwatch for the team or scouting ahead. That's pretty much why I have not mentioned her as much. John meets with these kids, and he has Fred take off his helmet to show that they're not aliens. And so John starts to ask who they are, why they're here, and these kids aren't that much younger than John and them. Looking at them, they're probably closer to 9, maybe 10, maybe younger, maybe older. But remember, John and the rest of Blue Team are all 15 years old. So even though it's physically you're thinking John's this old man because of the games, right now John's a 15-year-old kid apprehending 9 to 10-year-olds. And these 9 to 10-year-olds think these are super advanced robot aliens. And once they're able to convince that they are, in fact, human, John says hey, why are you here? What's going on? How did you get here? And they pretty much say we were, born here. The adults don't live very long. Apparently our people were abandoned here. And so this is when John realizes holy crap. These kids' ancestors were pirates or maybe even insurrectionists who did something wrong and were abandoned on this planet. They were taken here, dropped off, and then abandoned with no means of transport or communication to be saved. So that for the past 50 plus years, these people have been just raising, children, and the adults would die. Meaning it's been 90% kids and, 10% young adults, maybe late teens to early 20s who have been surviving on this planet. The kids were, roughly injured in the little interaction between the Spartans and them. So John, realizing that they're more of an asset than, an annoyance, begins to give first aid and tries to convince them hey, you know what? You help us, with your little vehicle over there, aka a runner is what they call them. You help us get to our mission objective and I'll see to it that you can get off. And the kids are cool, can the whole camp come? And John's what the hell is a camp? And this is where we get to learn that there's a lot more people known as the camp that are living on this planet. And again, they're all mostly kids or young adults. Since these runners can very easily traverse Netherop, the kids say, if you promise you'll help us and get us off this planet, we will help you. And these kids aren't dumb. They know of the UNSC. Their ancestors despised the UNSC, which is why John figures they were either pirates or insurrectionists. But these kids have no real choice. They want off this planet. This place is hell. So John says, okay, cool, yeah, I agree. You help us, I'll help you. And so the kids, reluctantly, but eventually agree. There are 3 kids. Lena is kind of like the main little character. She's in charge of these 2 boys known as Oscar and Arn. And both of these boys are kind of like, very much like, fight me, but like shaking about it. They're very brave. They're not kids that are like scared. Obviously living on this planet has really just developed them into very, stoic type of kids, but also very ignorant of the actual galaxy. They don't know what hours are. They don't know what like, how old are you? Or how many years have you been alive? And they're like, what's a year? Like they have no normal concepts of, just terminology that most of us would know. We then switch back over to Nezat, who is alarmed because he did not expect the Spartans to come. He was hoping that Oni would just send a few soldiers or scientists to come collect these beacons or these devices and then leave. That was the plan. Feign attack. Don't just sit there and be like, yeah, take it. Act like you're gonna attack, make it look real, but allow them to take these things and get off planet. But the Spartans coming changes everything. 1, he wants revenge for the destruction of the Ring of Mighty Abundance. And 2, killing a Spartan is like a high priority in the Covenant. So he realizes that he cannot allow these Spartans to, get these devices, ruin his mission, and also he can't let them live. Like, that would just be dumb. So Nezat begins preparations to go down to the planet. He first starts off by hiding the luminal beacons, one in a gravity harness and the other in a personal shield. Him and Tam are going to go down to the surface and take care of business, if you will. But before they can do that, they're alarmed by, obviously the crew, that another Covenant fleet is entering the system. And this is known as the Fleet of Swift Justice. And this is crazy because this is not a fleet here to help Nezat. This is a fleet here to kill Nezat. So now he's on a time crunch and he has to make this plan work quick. So back on Netherop, John is riding with the kids, or John and Blue Team are riding with the kids on the runner, learning more about each other. The kids are very just curious about what Spartans are, what's going on in the world or the galaxy, all this kind of stuff. We also learn that the rest of the camp, all these other kids on top of their own runners, are heading towards the Wheatley / the Lucky Break in order to capture one of the ships and get off the planet. Irregardless of if Blue Team and the UNSC helps or not, they are planning to get off this planet with one of those ships. John pretty much says, yeah, you can't do that because 1, you would not know how to fly an alien spaceship, and 2, no one can access a UNSC ship without prior authorization, so you're just gonna need to have to let us help you. And the kids are like, well, we can't do anything about it. Our main leaders, Rizal and Samson, are in charge. And we'll get more into those 2 characters later. During the ride, though, Blue Team gets an alert from the Wheatley, who says that Covenant forces have started dropping down near their location, and they need help. The Wheatley isn't really fully armed with soldiers. They're mostly just hired people to help, transport the ship off planet. That was the whole point of the Wheatley, was to come down, pick up the ship. Don't ask me how that works, but pick up the ship and take it off planet. But now they're here stuck because they have no real backup, and now the Covenant's coming and they only have very basic support, military support, nothing insane. And so John pretty much says acknowledge we'll be there as soon as possible. So what John does, especially after finding out that the gunshots from Kelly earlier disabled some of the pipes within the runner, disables it altogether. So John orders Kelly first to hide the kids, hide them somewhere safe, while me, Linda, and Fred advance to the Wheatley and try to give them support as quickly as possible. He does this because Kelly's the fastest, so he knows that once she hides someone, she can catch up much quicker. Everyone acknowledges their plans and they go through with it. Once again, we get another different POV, and this time is with Kelly, who takes the kids, finds a nice little cave and hides them there. She's like, all right, here's a gun, Here's some food and water. You guys stay safe. I'm gonna head out. But before she can do that, a spirit dropship comes flying down, a super spirit. But in reality, the spirit is holding 2 Umbras, these 2 like transport vehicles. I have to look in the encyclopedia. I don't know if we actually have a visual picture of them or not. I'll look, and if there is, there'll be a picture right here somewhere. But they're basically just transport vehicles. Kelly, realizing that these transports are not technically after her and the kids, they just know that Blue Team is somewhere in the vicinity, and they're thinking that they drop in behind them and attack from the back, everything will be fine. So Kelly decides to take matters in her own hands and tries to ambush them. While she's getting ready to do this, Lena comes up and goes, "Hey, I'm here to help." And Kelly's like, "What are you doing?" And Lena's like, "If we let you go out there and you die, John's gonna blame us." And Kelly's like, "John would never blame you guys." And Lena's like, "Yeah, he would. You're clearly his favorite." And Kelly's like, "John has no favorites." But this is where I'm actually gonna agree with the cast-off kids, because think about it this way. Kelly and Sam were the first friends John had when he was 6 years old. When he first became a Spartan, these were the 2 people he bonded with. Obviously now, Sam is dead. And so the only real, like, very first friend he's had is Kelly. So I think to a degree, yeah, they're right. Kelly is John's favorite. Maybe not in the same aspect that we see favorites, but he definitely holds her in a higher regard than most other Spartans. And that's clearly just because she is his longest and most devoted friend, and he'll do anything to protect her. And that goes the same with pretty much any of the Spartans. Of course, he's like Halsey now and sees the Spartans as his people, his brothers, his sisters, and he will do anything to protect them. But Kelly's definitely at like the top of the list. Sensing that Kelly could use these kids rather than having them be a burden, she gives each one of them hand grenades that they can prime, put in their slingshot, and shoot at the Umbras that Kelly's gonna bait towards them. Fortunately and unfortunately, one of the Umbras ignores them altogether and heads towards the Wheatley, while the other Umbra does follow and give chase to Kelly. The kids and Kelly are successful, take out all of the Covenant, and they're able to protect the Umbra for their own personal use. And Kelly and the kids get aboard, and instead of going towards Lucky Break and Blue Team, they head back to the rest of Blue Force to pick up some reinforcements. After that section, we then switch over to Nizat, who has finally landed on the surface of Netherop, and him and his elites begin to approach the Wheatley. Plan here is to feign an attack on them, drop the devices with the little beacons near them, and then retreat. Unfortunately, as they're nearing the Wheatley, the humans aboard like get off and get on like warthogs and like just run away. And Nizat's like, "Dog." So then he has to give chase to them. Back with John and the rest of Blue Team, aka Kelly or Linda and Fred, they've reached the Wheatley. And what they find there is the cast-offs, like a bunch of runners fighting off the Covenant. Now these aren't the same Covenant that Nizat was with. Him and his elites have already left the area to go chase the Wheatley survivors, but he did leave a group of elites here just to protect the Wheatley, and now they're engaging in combat with these cast-offs. John and the rest of Blue Team give support to the cast-offs, and at first the cast-offs are, of course, very hesitant to help John and them until they're able to, 1, convince their humans, and B, kill off the Covenant. This is where John and them meet Samson and Roselle, the 2 leaders of the camp, and they're not that much older than John. They're probably maybe early 20s. And so John again has to try and reason with them and say like, "Hey, we're here to help. I can get you off planet." And Roselle at first is kind of like, "We don't really need it." And so is Samson. Samson's fully against trying to, help the UNSC. But then John says, "If you try to access that ship, it will blow up. Like, just let us help you. We'll get you off planet." But they want a little more. They don't want just this simple promise of getting off the planet. So they make a deal with John. They'll help John and Blue Team with their mission if John can get them a sharp fin Corvette. John realizing that this is an old ship. Remember, their whole knowledge is based off their ancestors from 50 plus years ago. So a lot of their ideology of like modern technology is very outdated. So they want this very old ship, and John's like, "It'll be hard to find, but we can do it." What's the other part of the deal? And they're like, we also would like safe passage to a planet of our choosing so that way we can live in peace. John doesn't technically have the power to make these promises, but realizes that in this moment it's better just to say yes than to reject them outright. So he accepts their deal, and now they're teamed up. We cut to Commander Petrov, who is still way back at the very beginning of the book, hiding in this little culvert / gorge area, waiting for Blue Team to hopefully come back and save them. And fortunately enough, they do show up, but it's just Kelly in an Umbra with 3 kids. At first very confused by the kids, Petrov doesn't care. She wants to continue this mission and see it through. Unfortunately, the Umbra itself cannot house both the crew members of the Night's Watch and the Marines in the group. So she has to make some sacrifices. Initially, she tells the kids, get off, this is a military operation, you're out of here. But the kids give sass, and they're like, they wouldn't be this far without us, and we know this planet better than you, so you're gonna need us. Kelly doesn't necessarily take anyone's side, but she does agree with the kids, like, yeah, they did help, they do know their shit. Petrov kind of rolls her eyes and says, fine. But then again, this is where a major, she has to make a decision. The Umbra only has roughly 21 seats, which means only 21 people can fit. 3 of those seats are taken by the kids, and obviously Petrov and her first sergeant or lieutenant, known as, I can never say this name, Ceci Kasyok, I'll put the name right here on the screen, are 2, so that means only 16 people can get on board, and they're gonna need reinforcements. So of those 16, they are Marines that are of their choosing, and they board the Umbra and make their way towards the Wheatley, but it's gonna take some time. After making his deal with the cast-offs, John analyzes the battleground around the Wheatley. He's very confused of what's going on. Why would the Covenant give chase to the crew members of the Wheatley rather than trying to board and or salvage this ship? Sensing that there's something bigger going on, again, he still believes that this entire mission is bait for him and his Spartans. He's just overall confused, but he realizes he still has a mission to complete. So here's what he does. He orders Linda and the cast-offs to go and aid and support the crew of the Wheatley, who have gone elsewhere, while him and Fred make their way to the Lucky Break to board and salvage the ship. As John and Fred make their way to the ship, they actually get very close to it, because remember, the Wheatley and the Lucky Break aren't that far away from each other. And so as they're nearing the ship, it suddenly lifts off and leaves. Again, adding to the confusion of John, because if it was a trap, why did it leave? And if it was disabled, how did it leave? So clearly, something's going on, and John cannot figure it out. Sensing that there's no real other option, of what to do, they have to turn back. And as they turn around, they see 9 Banshees coming their way. And fortunately enough, before these Banshees can do a strafing run on the Spartans, they get quick support from aerial support. Now remember, going on in orbit is this task force known as Pantea, this conglomerate of UNSC ships that are fighting both the Zat's fleet and now also the Swift Justice fleet. But those 2 fleets are also fighting each other, so you have a 3-way fight going on, confusing all of the UNSC. But they're pretty much saying, hey, the window for this mission is now down to 4 hours. You guys need to either get that ship and get off, or we need to extract as soon as possible, because we cannot handle this much firepower for much longer. Once John regroups with Petrov and Kelly, who made their way to the Wheatley, as John and Fred, made their way back after the Lucky Break left, he informs her that hey, the ship just up and left. I don't know what's going on, but it's gone now. Petrov says, all right, well then that's the mission. We're done. Let's extract. And so John's like, cool, we need to go get Linda and the cast-offs. And Petrov's kind of is there any way Linda could just extract without them? And John's like, what are you saying? She's like, we don't really need to help them. And John pretty much says yes, we do. That's totally a violation of the Uniform Military Code, or at least some sort of law. And Petrov's like, we're at war. But unfortunately for Petrov, when they're on the ground, John is in charge of this entire operation. And he pretty much tells her hey, I see your advice, but no, I'm not abandoning anyone, especially since this has already happened before. And this is where we get our first little mention of Halo Collateral Damage, the comic book series that predates, or at least chronologically, predates Silent Storm and Oblivion. In that one, on one of the planets known as Alpha Corvus 2, Commander Yao forced Blue Team to abandon their insurrectionist allies, and I'll get more about this in Collateral Damage when the time comes, but these insurrectionists actually helped Blue Team, and they were going to help them get off planet until Commander Yao ordered them just to abandon them and leave. And John never wants to do that again because he saw that as just morally wrong. So here he's like putting his foot down and saying, no, everyone gets off this planet. We then cut back to Nezat, who is nearing this little small quick stronghold that the humans have laid out inside of a gulch. And as they come out of this cave to view the humans, their plan here is to put the shield harness with the luminal beacon onto one of their elites. They also had found a human navigation device, and the anti-gravity device that they were going to hide the luminal beacon in got damaged, so now they're hiding it in one of the humans' own navigation devices, and hopefully going to drop that near a human to pick up and be like, oh, someone must have dropped this, let's take it back. So the plan is to, again, fake a full-on attack, have this elite get as close as possible to someone, have him die, and once that elite dies, then Nezat and his people can retreat, basically, succeeding in their mission. As they're getting ready to go do this, we flip perspectives over to Linda, who is providing overwatch for the Wheatley survivors. As she's watching over them, she sees elites in camo start to make their way in, so she starts sniping them. The original plan for this part of the mission was to drive the Covenant back through this cave to where the cast-offs and the runners would ambush the elites coming back. Unfortunately, these elites are not backing off. No matter how much firepower is against them, they keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And so eventually cast-offs say, well, they weren't coming to the ambush, so we brought the ambush to them. So they join the fight with Linda and the Wheatley survivors against the Covenant. Eventually, a certain elite gets near a human scientist, dies from getting, shot, and then that's when the Covenant retreats, adding to the confusion to Linda on this mission as well. At the end of this battle, Linda goes down to the gulch and meets with the crew. She also meets the scientist, who happens to be not just any scientist, but an Oni scientist. And this Oni scientist says, that elite has a harness, a shield harness, we need it to take it to our materials group to be studied, help me get this thing out of here. And she also happens to find the little navigation device and picks that up as well, basically completing Nezat's mission. Blue Team and the rest of Blue Force make their way to Linda's position. They meet up with everyone, and this Oni scientist, pretty much known as Captain Stockton, says, hey, we got to get this out of here. I want to take that elite's body with this. And John's like, taking a whole elite with us will add to the capacity issue. And the issue is that, one, the Umbra cannot fit everyone. They have 60 plus members in this group, and currently, he's trying to figure out how to get everyone off this planet. They only have so much room. Roselle and Samson say, hey, we have runners. We can transport everyone to the Wheatley and then hopefully get off planet together on Pelicans that Task Force Pantea is sitting down to extract us. Again, Petrov kind of tries to push John towards just abandoning the cast-offs, but Roselle and Samson catch kind of wind of this, they can see what's going on. So Roselle comes up to Petrov and says, hey, you can use my runner. It has the best battery, it's in great condition, it's the best one to get you, being a high officer, to your ship so that way we can extract. And at that point, Petrov and Roselle walk off, leaving John and Linda a little suspicious of Roselle's actions. Why is she being so nice? Especially if she knows that Petrov's been trying to abandon them this entire time. Irregardless, John is confused as to why the elites suddenly retreated, especially given that the Spartans have not been fallen into a trap yet. Why do they chase the Wheatley? They must have something that is valuable to them, and we have to get it back. So John orders him, Blue Team, and a few of Marines to give chase to Nezat's group of Covenant, while the rest of the crew makes their way to the Wheatley to await extraction from these pelicans. On their way to where Nizat and his elites went, they come across this weird, ginormous, succulent-esque wall that's been like cut through with energy swords. So the Spartans give chase, and John requests that one of these pelicans come to his location to be prepared to extract him and his marines so that they too can get off the planet at the same time as everyone else. We then switch real quick to Nizat's perspective, who has made his way to the other side of the succulent wall, and now they're in the vicinity of the Lucky Break that flew off to another remote location, being this location awaiting Nizat. But they can't make their way just yet, because just as they are, now outside of the succulent wall, they hear the Spartans coming, and also they hear a spirit dropship coming. And it's not their own spirit dropship, it's one of the Silent Shadows. So what he does is he has him, Tam, and the rest of his elites hide and wait for these two groups to essentially attack each other, utilizing the confusion to make their escape to the Lucky Break and get off planet. And for the most part, that works. Blue team comes outside from the other side of the succulent wall. The spirit dropship drops down Silent Shadows and honor guards from High Cherry, and the two start duking it out. Nizat, seeing his opportunity, makes his run towards the Lucky Break, and as him and his elites are making their way to it, a Covenant bomber comes down from the sky and destroys the Lucky Break, having this shockwave blow Tam and Nizat, further away. When he finally comes to, he's met face to face with a High Charity honor guard. Realizing he's done what he can, his mission technically was completed, now hopefully his other officers aboard his ships in orbit can complete his mission, he submits to death. Unfortunately, he's not that lucky. First, the honor guard asks where are the luminal beacons, and he says, "Oh, which ships survive up there?" And the guy's like, "Oh, your main ship and another ship survived." He's like, "Cool. It was actually on the other ship that got destroyed, so big rip, my guy." And for some reason, the honor guard believes this. It's a very weird part. And so, again, now for Nizat, he's believing, okay, cool. They don't know where the beacon navigators are. We're good, we're clear, we're crisp. This plan can still work. I submit to death. But the honor guard orders his men, his other guards, to start stripping all of Nizat's groups of their armor and weapons. Basically saying, yeah, we're not killing you. You're going to be abandoned on this planet with nothing. And that's a greater punishment than death to Nizat. Back onto John's side of things, he's fighting these Silent Shadows, but he's also viewing everything going on with Nizat. And him and his forces eventually realize they're outnumbered, and they retreat to a pelican that drops down, gets them out of there. And as they're flying up, John watches Nizat get stripped of his armor, again adding to his confusion of what the hell's going on. But he's also looking at all these caves, these structures, this highway that he's been fighting in for these past hours, and realizes this looks more like a primordial city. Something about it it looks like something was living here, but it wasn't human. Again, just adding to this mystery of Netherop. Aboard this pelican, John is informed that everyone made it off the planet except Petrov. And he's confused. He's like, what the hell happened? Apparently, the runner that Petrov got from Rizal was actually damaged, and the battery died midway. And there wasn't enough time to get to her because these pelicans had to get out of the planet as soon as possible. The window for Task Force Pantea to stay in the system was within minutes of closing. So, according to Petrov and this crew chief who's telling John all this, Petrov ordered the Pelicans to get the Spartans. The Spartans were the priority, get them off planet. John senses that Rizal had something to do with it, but hearing this, that Petrov said it was okay, that it was fine, is still confused. He doesn't know what happened, but all he knows is that the mission was a failure and Petrov was left behind, but all the cast-offs were rescued. In the epilogue, John is brought in front of a court of inquiry to give testimony to why the mission failed, what went wrong, and whether or not Petrov was deliberately abandoned. In this inquiry, we have John, who's just in regular officer uniform, but like a service uniform, so out of Mjolnir armor. We have two JAG officers, one representing the UNSC, and one representing the cast-offs. We also have the two admirals, Preston Cole and Stanforth, the Oni admiral who acts like he's not Oni, though he clearly is, as well as Dr. Catherine Elizabeth Halsey and the cast-offs. Everyone starts questioning John, what went wrong, why did this happen? John made his point of saying like, hey, I really don't like how this mission was executed. It was too aggressive. If the Spartans are to be the key to winning this, we need to be more strategic on our plans. And then they kind of start asking him about like, did you tell Petrov that there was a uniform code and or law that basically says you cannot abandon people on planets such as Netherop? And John goes, yeah, I did. But John kind of knows he was wrong already, because when he told that to Petrov, his Milner onboard system like didn't pull up the data, like the specific law, meaning there was no law. So John knew he was wrong, but for him it became more of a moral issue rather than a legal one. So the JAG officers say, okay, well, you were wrong, like you can abandon them, it's completely fine, but there's nothing they can do at this point. And the admirals, for the most part, are on the side of the cast-offs when it comes to Petrov. They heard what the crew chief said, they heard the order given by Petrov. They cannot find any evidence that Petrov was deliberately abandoned by the cast-offs. There's just no evidence. So then they switch over to the promises John made. Did you promise them a sharp fin corvette and passage to a planet of their choosing? John said yes. And the admirals go, okay, cool. Well, John doesn't actually have that power to make those promises, which for a moment piss off Rizal and Samson. But then it's kind of like, well, what are we to do with them? Because look at them, they're primitive. We can't just keep them. We can't imprison them. It'd be wrong. So ultimately, the admirals agree. They're like, fine, we'll find the sharp fin corvette and give it to you. What planet do you want to go to? And they say Gao. If you don't remember, Gao is a heavily insurrectionist planet. And so the admirals panicked. They're like, no way, like you cannot go there. Like that's Hector Nieto's home planet. We actually have reason to believe that Hector Nieto is there. Remember, Hector Nieto is the man who was aboard the Starry Night and all these prowlers who ended up betraying John and was discovered to be an insurrectionist spy collecting data about the Spartans in Silent Storm. And so right here, they're basically telling them no, like you cannot go to Gao, we can't trust you with this information. But then the JAG officer representing the cast-off says, what does it matter if they go? Two things. If you're right and Hector Nieto is there, his wealth of knowledge of the Spartans and of all UNSC operations is vastly better than anything these people have. Look at them, they're primitive. And that's the second thing. They're primitive. They don't even understand like basic modern, technology and terminology. Like they're harmless. And the admirals kind of go, all right, you got a point, but can we trust them to go there and not talk about the Spartans? And Samson and Rizal say, if John keeps his promise to us, we will keep our promise by never talking about them. And they all look at John. John looks at them, and John says, I trust them. And with that, the admirals relent and say, okay, well, Master Chief, if that's what you believe, then we're good to go here. Before the ending of that, though, John is informed that Petrov being stuck on the planet has just become permanent, because before the Covenant left, they placed mines, orbital mines, all around the planet, preventing anything from getting in or getting out. We then cut back to Netherop, where we see Nazat and his elites, now stripped, now many feeling forsaken by the gods, watching Petrov from a distance, who's cooking food. But there's a lot of stuff around here, so it leads them to believe that there's more humans somewhere around. So for now, they wait and they watch. Even though these elites are hungry and they would rather just kill her and, do what they gotta do to survive, Nazat still believes in the gods. Even though he feels like he's on the path of Oblivion, he does feel like that maybe she's a gift from the gods. So for now, we must wait and we must watch. And that's the book. I'm going to tell you right now, when I first read Oblivion and Silent Storm, I loved Silent Storm so much more. I actually didn't really care about Oblivion's story that much. I thought it was good. But upon this second reading, that's shifted. I really, really liked this book. I think the setting, the multi-layered confusion between like the Covenant's goal and Chief's expectations of what's going on really just drove home the story that I just found myself enthralled with it all. I loved watching like John be like, okay, so this is what's gonna happen, and then the Covenant's like, we're gonna do this, and John's like, what? I just really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the cast-offs, the ending, just the way it ended with Petrov being abandoned, the Nizat and them watching over them. Like, even though I know we have a book now known as Cast-Offs, you know, basically showing us what happens, I think right now having no real, you know, knowledge of what happens in that book just makes me excited to reread Cast-Offs when we get to it. It will be a while because that book takes place around the timeline of Infinite, so we're very clearly very far away from it. But overall, Oblivion, I think, is just a lot better in terms of story, plot, and again, with Silent Storm, when I realized that 90% of the mission was the exact same thing, I got bored with Silent Storm. I knew what to expect. They're going to enter a ship, they're going to nuke it, they're going to get off. This one I never knew what was going to happen because things kept evolving and kept changing. One other fun fact is that Halo Outcasts is currently the last book by Troy Denning. It came out in 2023, and as of right now for the book lineup of this year, still nothing by Troy Denning, which sucks because I really like Troy Denning's work. I loved Last Light. I loved Outcasts. I loved Retribution and, you know, Divine Wind. Like, these are great books. Troy nails this Halo universe really well, and I really just hope we get more work from him in the future. All right, so what should you read, watch, and or play in order to prepare for Halo Oblivion? Well, first and foremost, if you're going down the chronological order, you've got a lot of work to do here. First, I would say Collateral Damage. Again, even though it's only briefly mentioned, I think that seeing what happens in Collateral Damage and then seeing that reference in Oblivion really just kind of drives home why John does not want to abandon the cast-offs. Really helps. Then, of course, Silent Storm. And here's where I'm gonna disagree with Troy Denning. You can technically read Oblivion on its own. The main story is separate of that of Silent Storm. It does not follow through on the events completely. Problem is, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of references, there's a lot of things that have happened or are happening because of what happened in Silent Storm. There's mentions of Hector Nieto, there's mentions that, you know, you have Nizat. You have all these things that are talked about and they're briefly summarized, but I don't think that they do well enough that, like, if you jumped into this book not reading Silent Storm, you're not going to fully grasp what's going on. Like, okay, why should I care about this Hector Nieto? Like, why do they care about Gao and all this? Why should I care about Nizat? Clearly he messed up in the past, but like, big whoop, they're in the middle of a war, these things happen. It's not until you read Silent Storm that you fully grasp like the weight of all these things happening. And then the other thing you want to watch before Oblivion, not to really understand the story, but to keep the timeline perfect, is Halo 4 Foreruns Dawn, because it's briefly mentioned. And it's just, again, it helps build the timeline. You do not have to read it in order to understand it. If you just want purely, like, just necessary reads, I would say just Silent Storm. Collateral Damage and Foreruns Dawn are just good, you know, not essentials, but like complementary things to watch and read in order to have fun with this timeline. But that's pretty much it for today's video. Let me know what you guys think about Halo Oblivion. Did you read it? Did you like it? Do you feel like it had a good conclusion, or at the very least, partial conclusion in Halo Cast-Offs? And then also let me know if you think it could be read purely on its own. Let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not stating that this is a fact and Troy Denning is wrong. Clearly he is the author, he knows more than me. But my own personal take is you should read Silent Storm before Oblivion. So let me know what you think on that matter. And just as far as the next book goes, it may be a little while before I get Cold Protocol out. Not because I'm not reading it, but because there's so much information that I have so many notes and I'm only 50 pages in. That Cold Protocol right now, it's so good. It's so good. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in Halo Cold Protocol.